It's episode 167 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner.
Hey there, Author Story listeners. This is Kevin Tomlinson from Draft to Digital, and I know that you have a book sitting there just waiting to get out to the world, and you're kind of wondering what the next steps are. So that's why you need to go visit drafttodigital.com/authorstories. That's draft2digital.com/authorstories. And that's where you're going to find all the help you need to go from having a book on your hard drive to having it on someone's Kindle or iPad or other reading device. So go visit drafttodigital.com/authorstories right now.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. You can find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. And when you're there, please click on the links in the right-hand sidebar and subscribe to the show, either on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher Radio or YouTube. It really does help to boost us in the rankings when you subscribe. And if you would go one better and even leave a review or comment on those platforms, the more engagement we get, the higher it pushes us up in the rankings. The higher we are in the rankings, the more people listen and the better quality guest we can get. So please do that for me, and thank you to those of you that have already done it. I really do appreciate it. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors this week. ThirdScribe.com is there to connect readers and writers in a new and innovative way, building your author platform. For those of you writers that are out there listening, is the most essential thing you can do for your writing career. Go and listen to the episode I did last week with Rob McClellan. We go very deep into it, but thank you to ThirdScribe.com for sponsoring. Also, thank you to Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. If you are looking for pulpy goodness, do you remember the pulp magazines and comics that we used to read as kids? Do you remember the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits? That's what Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is. This monthly publication that Daniel Arthur Smith pours his heart and soul into is one of the very best things in publishing these days. So click on the link in the show notes and go check out our fine sponsors. Stay tuned after the show for a clip from Richard Gleaves, and visit all of our sponsors in the show notes. I think that you'll find something new that maybe you didn't know of before.
With the oppressive transport authority controlling every aspect of their existence, Leah and her father do what they can to carve out a good life for themselves. Leah spends her nights scavenging and risking capture as she hunts for salvage her father can trade for food and clothing. When Leah takes a bag of salvage from a dying stranger, she and her father are plunged into the world of transport and its war against the terrorist organization, Trace. As transport closes in, Leah will need to decide who she can trust and how far she's prepared to go to save her father's life. The Girl in the City by Philip Harris is the first book in a thrilling dystopian science fiction trilogy set in Michael Bunker's world of Pennsylvania. If you enjoyed books like The Hunger Games and Divergent, you'll love The Girl in the City and its sequels, The Girl in the Wilderness and The Girl in the Machine. All three books are available now on Amazon Kindle. Check the show notes for a link.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm really excited tonight to have two storytellers with me. I love doing some of these episodes where I get a couple of folks together, where we talk about not only our individual journeys, but sometimes we have the privilege of working with other people, and that changes the whole creative dynamic. So I'm really excited to peel back the layers of Nick Breaker and Paul Hicks today on Author Story. So welcome to the show, Nick and Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Sure. I'm going to start, let's start with you, Nick. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, it really goes back to in my youth, probably about the teenage years. I was fairly avid. I was extremely avid role-playing, an RPG gamer. So I did adventures where, we started with Dungeons & Dragons. I created my own worlds, that sort of thing. So I got really comfortable with creating these adventures or these stories that my friends could all enjoy as well. And, we had our own dungeon master, and I did my own fair share of DMing and all that. So I kind of got it very early, where I just dove deep into the fantasy and the science fiction, and all those stories have been some of the things that I've used as a baseline, if you will, of a lot of the writing I'm doing today.
Yeah. I love that that RPG games seem to be making I don't want to act like they ever went away, because of course they did not, but it seems like they've kind of bubbled back to the top of our collective consciousness again, and people are getting excited about pen and paper games again, which is really kind of counterintuitive that we now live in a world where we all carry a supercomputer in our pocket, and but there's something about getting back to that base kind of storytelling around the campfire kind of thing that RPG games really bring out in us.
For me, that's absolutely true. I think I enjoy. Well, I know I enjoy the getting around with the friends, around the table. In fact, on a twice a year basis, I'll get together with some of the old buddies back in Indiana, and we'll just meet in a national park or something like that, rent a cabin, and just have a couple of nights of just have fun. We'll go through adventures and kind of rekindle old memories and that sort of thing. So I still am deeply into it and enjoy it. But really, it's all about the camaraderie, getting back with friends.
That's great. At what point in your life did you realize that this was something that not only you enjoyed doing for fun and fun and games, literally, but that this is something that you could kind of craft into actually becoming a fiction author?
I would say it was probably 2012. There was a lot of discussions before that, like Paul and I would sit in the break room, or our what we call the Greenway. We have a cafeteria at our company. We both work together at the same company, and we would just talk about the adventures and some of the things and some of the ideas he had and I had. We went to the point of actually detailing out the story and how it would go and all that, and it was so dynamic. We got to the point where we kind of looked at each other and was like, you know what, we probably should put this on paper, actually start writing this down. And so we started the research, and as you all know, when you're a writer, there's still rules. You still got to follow the rules. There's things you got to do. If you're going to stay in third person semi-omniscient, then don't switch to first person. Don't change your point of views. All those things that you, as a writer, a new writer, you probably don't know. And
you're just trying to keep me from having fun.
Yeah. So exactly. And so we got to talking about it, and we did this for probably, Paul, do you think it was probably a year or more? We just chatted, and then we got serious?
Yeah, it was at least a year.
Yeah. So I'd say 2012 is when we first started that. We went from thought to pen and paper. We actually put it down, and we made mistakes. For example, the first book we wrote, I think we got 3/4 of the way. No, we got it all the way through, but 3/4 of it was just pitched, and we started again.
Wow.
So to give you an idea of just what we didn't know and how we had to fix that. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to that in just a minute, because I really want to kind of pick apart your creative process, because this is fascinating that you guys work closely together in your day jobs and actually have face-to-face communication, which some of the co-writing teams that I've had on kind of do this over Skype and share documents and things like that. But it sounds like you guys have a really unique dynamic. So let's bring Paul in real quick, and then we'll get back to that. Paul, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer?
It probably stems back to high school. In high school, I too was an RPG player. I loved to be a dungeon master and create the adventures that everybody would go on.
Nice.
I had several writing papers that I would turn in. I got A's, not bragging, I guess, but the creativity was there. And, sometimes it was stories that came out of a dream, literally. And I would just get up that next morning and just start writing. Beyond that, once I got into my working career and kind of took over my life, I always remained an avid reader. And every time I read a new book, I would analyze the book, analyze the story, and come up with my own ideas.
I love that, Paul. So what kind of stuff were you reading first off?
Fantasy mostly, and then sci-fi.
Okay. And you would kind of take the story apart to see how it worked? Were you kind of like identifying the pieces of narrative and kind of looking at what the author was doing to weave in twists and turns, or what exactly were you doing?
Exactly. Authors always have an end point that they're trying to get to, and they're trying to lead you there in their own way. And so I'm always trying to read into what they're doing and trying to find out what that end point was going to be before I got there. I have to say, early on, I did not pick up on everything the way I do now, because I've learned some of the mechanics of writing. Like the third act reveal. So I know to look for that now. So there's things like that I see now that I didn't see then.
Well, and there are things that you can identify and pick apart just as a reader, but until you start weaving the story for yourself, it's kind of one of those things that you just kind of have to do it to figure out how it works. Exactly.
And some of the stories that I ended up sharing with Nick before we decided to start writing, I hadn't actually shared those with anybody because, they were just ideas in my head. But I had gone far and deep into the characters already, farther and deeper than I thought I had. But when I shared them with him, it's like we had this long conversation.
So before you started talking with Nick, it sounds like you were already kind of on your way to creating some of the stuff on your own. At what point did you decide that you wanted to take this from hobby to, I want to be serious about this?
It was one of those conversations over breakfast with Nick. We were sharing those stories. We were both like, we both have story ideas, and neither one of us have sat down individually to create a story by ourselves, to put it down on paper and to finish a book. And then we said, well, why don't we do it together? Maybe we can push each other enough to finish a book and get started.
Gotcha. So Nick, when Paul started talking to you about this, I'm assuming that you guys had a friendship before, and that you would just, I know friends of mine, we talk about things that we love, and we kind of nerd out about things. I'm assuming that this kind of grew out of that.
It did. I laughed earlier when you said that, because the friendship kind of started over. Paul was talking about some projects that he was doing on his new home. He'd bought a home and was, he's kind of a hands-on guy, so he does a lot of his own work. So he was like, well, I could use some help. So I ended up actually doing a lot of helping him get some of his things. We built a goat farm? What was it? The fence that's around the goats. We did the wiring. Yeah. Put the top part of your house on for all intents and purposes. So yeah, the friendship grew as a part of me helping him, and not to say that he's never came over here and helped me, because he did. But it is funny that it did start in that way, because we really didn't know each other until we met at work, and then from that point it just kind of grew organically.
That's great. What do you guys do at your day job? You don't have to name it per se, but what do you guys do?
It is computers. It is the technical job of making sure the computer's up and running when we've got a company that kind of relies on this machine to be up and running all the time. It is, and for all intents and purposes, a very stressful job, but at the same time, it's very enjoyable. I'm more of the technical resource. I'm the guy that kind of what was it? I had a boss years ago. Something about twiddling the bits. That's what he called it. So I'm actually in there, making the changes and doing the administrative type stuff. And then Paul is more in management. Well, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I'm in IT management. I'm over a group of DBAs as well as some engineers. And I personally have a love for databases, managing those, and data analytics. So I'm over I guess, 4 different groups, and so there is a lot of stress, a lot of things to do, and sometimes it's hard to keep up.
Right. And before we started recording, we talked a little bit about kind of how all 3 of us have worked in IT and tech related stuff. So you guys take this question with the good humor that it's intended, but it seems to be an inordinate amount of guests that I've had on this show that write science fiction and fantasy and also have a background in some sort of technical work, whether it be, information technology or there tends to be a kind of a bridge between these two things. And some people who are not familiar with the kind of people that we are, I'm going to lump myself with you guys, so it doesn't sound like
good company.
Being directed. Yeah. A lot of people assume that we are very analytical and kind of robotic, and that there are these stereotypes of people that work in the tech industry. Yet we have all of these great pieces of fiction and really gripping tales and all that come from these people that other folks have pigeonholed as being, these certain types of people. Do you see the connection between working in the tech industry and writing fiction?
I do. One of the things when I started getting into the writing thing about, let's see, it's been about 5 years now, is that the people that I met, either at the conventions or, personally, some of the people authors, some of their work that I've read, it does seem like there is a link between someone who has a analytical mind, maybe a computer background or engineering background, that kind of thing. They seem to be the ones drawn to writing these kind of stories. So, yeah, in my mind, I've seen that a lot.
Yeah. What about you, Paul? Do you find any tension there between the kind of absolutes that come with working in tech and in the dreaming up fictional worlds?
Yes, I do. Working in the tech field, you have to be analytical, and you have to look at the problems in front of you, and you have to think outside the box. So that whole idea of thinking outside the box can actually make you pretty creative. And some of the problems that we run into are found by being creative and looking at things differently. So with that, when it comes to building a story or building a world, I feel that we're just expanding our already creative nature.
Yeah.
That's exactly the answer I expected you to give. I love that. When you have to get outside of the rules and think outside the box, that's fertile ground for coming up with stuff that's never been done before.
Like, for example, something as simple as gravity being half what it is on Earth. What can life look like as a result of that? It really isn't as simple as you think to say that, they're half as tall or they're even taller, that kind of thing. It is a totally different dynamic, and you have to actually think that through. And I think it helps to have our background, the way the analytical mind, the engineering background, that sort of thing.
Well, and it's not only do you think about these physical appearances would be different, but what does that then do to how people relate to one another, and how would society change because of this? And it can just roll out from there, and the possibilities are endless, I guess.
In fact, one of the first book we wrote, just a real quick comment about that. One of the planets that we actually interface with as when we're writing the book is a planet that's roughly 3/4 of the gravity of Earth, and as a result, we had to stop and think about, well, what would they be like if they didn't have the stronger gravity? Would that mean that they might be less physical and potentially have more of an opportunity to be a more mental, more cerebral type race? And so we just made the decision that that's what we thought it would be, that an alien form on a planet with gravity less than Earth could potentially not be a physical race, or at least less so.
Were you going to say something a second ago, Paul?
No, I was going to go along his train of thought there. That we, in creating some of the planets that we were working on, we even thought about the air that they were breathing, how that changed them, and then, we were looking at destroying particular planets and how we could do that. So we got pretty creative.
That was a big part of the story, is figuring out how aliens might destroy other planets. So yeah, we enjoyed that part. A blast of fire across the face of this particular planet, or would it be a pandemic substance, which would be the most relevant or volatile or the best choice for the alien? So
that's awesome. So you guys said earlier that in your cafeteria you started just kind of talking about these ideas that you guys were excited about. What was that first story that kind of ignited between the two of you, and how did you decide to proceed? As I'm a solitary writer. I've worked in conjunction with other writers to do things like anthologies and things like that, but never to the point that we were co-planning a story. So that really intrigues me, how you two guys work together. So tell me a little bit about how it started, and then how did your workflow develop out of that?
Paul, do you want to?
Sure.
Okay.
The first story for me was, and this is, I guess, a working title, but it was called Spirit Link. And it was a story based on, say, a Fey world that's interlinked with our world. And going back in some history, the connection between those two worlds was severed. And over time, those two worlds were starting to come back together. And the only way it's being done was through a spirit link from one creature from the Fey world with the person from our world. And the story goes on from there. So I was sharing with Nick a snippet of the story that I had written on that. And then, that cascaded into the stories that we actually are writing, the ones that he was working on. So whenever we decided to write the stories, it ended up being the stories that Nick was writing on or working with, because we had several ideas for the book.
Yeah.
So, but before you go any further, did you do anything with that story? Because I love the premise you just pitched.
I've been working on it kind of in the background for myself.
Yeah.
But I have not done anything with it yet.
Oh, please do. I want to read that.
I beg him to do it too, but yeah,
that sounds amazing.
Writing the first couple of books together, though, was taxing at best. I mean, it's a lot of time, as you know, to put that effort in to get it done. And then for us, sitting there in the cafeteria, or sometimes we'd go to lunch at different restaurants, but sitting there and talking about it, trying to figure out, okay, this is how the story starts. We know we want to end. We're going to do this epic, kind of a. In this case, the series we're working on, it's a very epic threefold kind of ending. And so we knew where we're going, and then it was, okay, all right, so how do we get there? And then we knew that the characters had to go down this path. Why would they do that? You got to get the motivations. Oh, I wanted to throw this in here. We were talking earlier about learning how to write and all that. One of the things that, if you're out there and you're listening and you want to get into writing as an author, make a conscious decision that you no longer want to be surprised when you watch a movie or read a book, because when you start getting into the industry and you realize, why authors do that, why they write a certain way, or why the movie goes a certain way, you're going to start picking up very early how the movie ends, how the book ends. So you're not going to be surprised in most cases. So you need to understand that you're going to lose a lot, I think, because you're already caught on.
Yeah, and my family gets mad at me because I'll yell out, "Well, there's the end of Act 1."
Yep, exactly.
Inciting incident. They're like, "Shut up." Okay?
There's a few authors that break this rule, but nobody puts anything in a book by chance. If it isn't fluff. If it's there, it's there for a reason.
Right.
So.
Right. Or they're a bad writer.
That's true. So, but
but yeah, things are there for a reason.
Yes.
So you guys started just trading ideas back and forth. Excuse me, Paul. You said that that Nick had some ideas that he was already working on it, and you guys decided to choose that to work on. Kind of what was how did you guys start planning on how you were going to approach this, and how do you split duties and things like that?
Well, when he pitched the story to me about the Galactic Satori Chronicles, it was a very exciting story, and then he allowed me, he let me take some creative liberties with some aliens, and once he did that, I just went full force. I started writing scenes. I started throwing ideas at him. He started throwing more ideas back at me, and that creative collaboration was full of energy. It was just full of energy and nonstop. I mean, we would sit down for 2 hours and like, oh my gosh, we better go back to work.
Yeah. Hopefully the boss or any of the directors that know us aren't listening right now. So,
Right.
Well, that explains why they weren't back for more lunch. Yeah.
Right. That's and system crashes correlate with those lunch days.
Bad news. Yeah.
Right. So Nick, this was an idea that you had already.
Yep.
Where do you think this idea came from?
Again, back to my RPG days, and the drive to and from work is a 30-minute for me both ways. So there was a lot of time for me to think about it. So when I came up with the idea of this alien race that's very cerebral, they have developed, telepathy, some type of mind control, or a very subtle type of mind control. All those little ideas that we wanted to throw in there, and then we came up with this, what I think both of us consider a very epic ending to Galactic Satori Book 1 that I don't think anybody's ever done before. I have not read anything or seen a movie that the aliens try to destroy Earth in this particular way. So those, when you get to that point, you're kind of creating this stuff, and it just feeds on itself, on the energy of us working on it. The excitement grew, and we were like, yeah, we got to do this. So then we made a decision. Yep, let's do it. So how do we start?
Nice. So did the epic ending there? Was that what kind of what you had first? Like sometimes I'll get a story idea, and I'll know the ending, and I'll this epic thing is in my mind, and then I have to figure out how to get people to that. Sometimes I start with a character and I see them in a situation, and then I feel like, well, I wonder what's going to happen to them when they make this decision and that decision, and just kind of how this folds out. And then what outside forces, influence that, and you throw in some supernatural elements and things like that. So stories come to writers in different ways, and then the writing of the thing kind of is dependent on how the story came to you in the beginning. What was the initial thing that came to you about Galactic Satori Chronicles?
Paul and I talked about this at length, and one of the things that we keep always going back to is that The Wheel of Time had a lot of books in it before it was finished. Yeah. And we're really going to be at that same level as far as quantity of books. So then you get into the industry and you start learning, well, you got to break it up somewhere. So how do you create these sub-epic endings that will make a good first book and then a good second book? And so, to answer your question, we actually have got the entire story lined up from book 1 through – it looks like it could be 9 books easily. So that's conservative.
Now that's a great point that you just made. More and more, we as writers are focused on writing series, because in the kind of publishing landscape that we're in now, readers like to, if they find a book they like, they want to read more about that. Either read more by you because they trust you as a writer, or they're invested in the characters and the world that you've built, and they want to continue into that. And as a reader, I know exactly that feeling. But as a writer, that's a very difficult thing, a very difficult landing to stick, where there's a satisfying ending, where you close the back of the book, which, we don't do so much anymore, or we click the last page on our Kindle, and we're satisfied. We're like, well, that was a great ride that I went on. I'm happy I did it, and I've got things to sit and ponder on, and I'm satisfied. Although the story continues. That's a very difficult thing to give people a satisfying ending and set up for the story to continue. Have you guys learned anything that you could share about that very difficult nuance?
Well, that's a tough question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I was actually working. Nick and I was working on this together. The first book was coming to about 200,000 plus pages.
Yes, it was. Yep.
And we had to,
200,000 words.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Words. Yeah.
That's correct. So
200,000 pages would be like the Wheel of Time.
It would, yes.
No kidding. Yeah.
It would be endless, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So anyway, we started looking at where we were heading, how much we had in there, and we had to take a step back and look at what's a good point to have this epic ending. That cliffhanger, but yet it answers all the questions in book one. So I think that's where we had to take it from.
It was tough because the overall story arc, as I shared earlier, is probably at least 9 books. But each one of these books that we're putting out has to have that, like you say, the epic ending. So when we were talking about this, one of the things that we kind of learned as we went was, one, you got to have a reasonable size book, and ours was not. It was way too big. And so we pared it down to 168,000 words, I think it was. So even then it's too large because as a first-time writer, they're telling you, the industry says, hey, look, 80,000 to 120,000, that's a good novel. The big guys, the big dogs, they can do the what do they call them? The books that are about 3 inches thick kind of thing. I forget what they call them. They're epic sagas or something like that. But we didn't know that when we started. So the book got that big, it just grew. We knew where we were going, but we couldn't allow it to get more than 200,000 words for sure. So backing it off and paring it down, still making it interesting, still making sure that we ended it in the right place, and then with that last epilogue, that one scene in the end that kind of hints that there's more to come. That was tough to do. I was probably, as a writer, that was I can learn to write in third person. I can learn to write in first person. Don't change point of view, that kind of thing. That's easy for me, but that's tough, is to create that story that you have to get all those details in there. You still have to cover all the major plot lines and end it the right way. So that's a tough one to answer. I'm not sure I could. I think it's something you got to do with experience.
Yeah. I'm with you there. It's just one of those things that you can tell all the little tricks that you've learned, but until you have to take your own story and take it to that place, it's just one of those trial and error things, isn't it?
Yep.
So I'm kind of a process nerd and kind of a tool nerd. I'm constantly playing with new tools and ways to do things, and it's just something that it's probably because I grew up as a kid, kind of in that home computer PC revolution, where you tinkered with everything, and that was just part of the joy of doing things, and I think I still have a lot of that. But so I love to hear how people, how they work and kind of what their workflow is like, especially people that work together. So what's very practically, what is the workflow between you two? Do you sit down and did you outline the book out and then say, okay, you take this piece, I'll take this piece, or does one of you outline and the other put flesh on the bones? What's your process for doing that?
Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, it's funny that you should ask that, because in the industry, you have the outliners, and then you have what they call the pantsers. The people just sit down to the keyboard and They have the idea in their head and they just start writing. Well,
who does that?
I'm the outliner. Nick is the pantser.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So,
oh my!
So
we actually argue about this too. So.
Yes. There's lots of interesting conversations between the two and why you should do one over the other.
And I don't think either one of us will ever agree with the other. So let's just make that out there.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, that makes it more interesting that one of you is a plotter and one's a pantser. So how do you reconcile those things?
Usually by throwing something at each other.
Yeah. We've heard each other. Yes, black eyes, that sort of thing. No, I think it's mutual respect. He has his vision of the book, and so do I. So one of the things we did do was, and he touched on it earlier, is that he got the alien scenes. So as we were doing the book, there were numerous scenes that we wanted to write from the alien perspective. So Paul simply took care of that for us, or for me anyway. And I typically wrote the human or the Earth style scenes, and then he would read my stuff, put his voice into it. I would read his stuff and put my voice into it. We would try to blend what we do, because everyone writes differently.
Sure.
So by the point of him looking at my work and vice versa, we got a Paul and Nick voice together on book 1 and 2. So it was tough. It made it last longer, but I think at the same time, it's a better product.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was
Paul.
going to say that first book, it was obvious that he had a particular voice when writing, and then I had a particular voice. And before we started our edit process, it was like, oh, there's one author. Like, yes, that's definitely another author right there.
Our beta readers picked it up very quickly.
Oh yes.
Really. Well, by taking different viewpoints, different viewpoint characters or viewpoint species, even. It sounds like that would have been easier by splitting duties that way, because those viewpoints would naturally feel different to the reader. Obviously, there were still things that you had to reconcile for flow and things like that. So it seemed like you were one guy. But was that easier taking the different viewpoints?
Yes, it was. Especially for book 1. For me, having the creativity and the space to write all the aliens, it was enlightening, it was encouraging and exciting.
He got the better part of the deal though too, because he gets to write about these. He writes as these evil characters, right? Because not all of them were evil, but most of them were, and so he had the what I would call the funner part, intentionally so. But so one of the things that ended up we learned after the fact was, you can't start your novel from the antagonist's point of view. At least you shouldn't. I'm sure there's writers out there who've done it. You typically want to start it from your protagonist's point of view. So one of the best scenes that Paul wrote, we didn't include it because we couldn't make it work as one of the first scenes of the book. So we kind of had to rip it up and pepper it into the rest of the story.
Now, that's a great point that you bring up, and we don't talk about that enough. Why would you start the book from the protagonist view, not the antagonist? Does it have to do with building a relatability with the reader, so that there's something they can care about? Is that the thing?
I think what you're
exactly
doing.
Yes.
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
You want the reader to make that connection with your protagonist as quickly as possible. You have to make them like that character and get into that character's psyche quickly.
Otherwise, your antagonist, the reader, I think, looks at that first chapter and goes, "Oh, the book is about the antagonist," because that's their mindset. That's what they're going to think because you started it out with chapter 1. So,
and that's true because we took that first chapter that I written from the alien's point of view to a workshop, and there's actually people there saying, "Hey, I wish you'd write a book from this."
Yeah, they love the character.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you guys are both science fiction and fantasy fans, and you've written this book. You're working on this series that is definitely science fiction. You've got space and aliens and all of this kind of stuff. There is a a line, and it gets really blurry when you start writing certain types of science fiction, where it bleeds over into fantasy, because you're dealing with an alien world that is made up or is potentially real, and you. Admittedly, you guys were talking about, if we've got 3/4 Earth gravity, what does that mean? And then, things start coming out of there. You get telepathy, and to some people that's a little bit like magic. Mm-hmm. And even though we can build some explanations into it that satisfy our that scratches that science fiction itch. It kind of runs the gamut between science fiction and fantasy. What do you guys think about that? About the derivations in genre, and are those things important, or are we just writing imaginative fiction and it just has a little different window dressing on it?
I think it's the beauty of the entire industry is when you do this fiction, when you're putting things together and you're creating these worlds. Let's face it, most people who read science fiction would like it to be real or close to real. So in other words, if Isaac Asimov is writing about a certain type of scientific, maybe a spaceship or a specific technology, people want to believe that's possible. So I can't create, let's say, a device or a weapon that can destroy a galaxy. It seems so far-fetched that even if it's a science fiction book, can you really create something like that that would require so much energy to destroy a galaxy? It's an extreme example, but I guess the point is that one of the things that he and I talked about a lot was, and you'll read when you read the book, you'll learn about this. But these aliens are actually creating a microscopic hole from their planet to Earth, and they're projecting their consciousness through that. And let's face it, that's going to require a lot of energy. That's one of those things that you still have. To be realistic about it, right? So there is a suspension of disbelief in that to say, is that even possible? I want to say yes. I think if you have the right technology, the right, I guess in our case, the universe itself is able to do that. It makes it believable. And it's not a central part of the story. It's not the huge focus, but it is the conduit which lets us create that action, that fun, that interesting story.
Yeah. Paul, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking, a lot of the times it depends on your reader as well, because especially when you get to science fiction, you have a lot of readers that are hard into the science. They want you to explain why you're able to do things. And then you have, I guess people like me that kind of cross between the genres. I like the fantasy worlds, and I like it when you can meld a science fiction and a fantasy world together. I personally don't have to have, hard science behind a science fiction book, because I like the creativity of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I loved, take The Martian, for instance. I loved it. I loved the way Andy weaved in all of these things that he had actually worked out, and that made it more fun. And, I love the way he did it. I don't know that I want to read that type of story every day, I think there's a place for all of it, and to be one of those readers that just says, I need all the hard facts behind this before I'm going to, really sign on to this, is really short-sighted.
We made a conscious decision to write space opera. We want the readers to be more interested in the characters and how they're reacting to each other and how they're trying to get through this world than to try to say, or to prove that you can create a microscopic hole and send your consciousness through it and actually swap with another, being in the 67 light years, I think it is, away. Or if they can get past that, they'll enjoy that interaction, that relationships that the characters have, because the science isn't really about it, the story. It's about the characters.
Right, and that's what we all read for. We want to understand ourselves and each other in this fun story, along the way. That's what we read for, I think.
Yeah, I do.
That's what I read for.
Go ahead.
Because that's what I read for. I like to get into the character. I become part of that character. I don't become part of the science, but when you become part of that character,
right.
you follow them through and you feel what they feel.
Right, exactly. So this week, when we're recording this, I believe it was yesterday that NASA announced that they found a solar system with something like 7 possibly inhabitable planets with 3 or 4 of those within the golden zone, whatever they call it. And it's about 40 light years away. And sounds like, there's a lot of buzz around, especially with writers, hey, what can we do with this? When you guys see stories like that, do you get excited because you guys thought of this kind of scenario first before all of this? And does are you tempted to go read all the literature from there to see what you can extrapolate and put into your story?
I read the same article, so I guess in a sense I kind of know. I think I actually posted on Facebook as being nerd porn because I loved the idea of this solar system that's close by to us, and of course with our technology we're not going to be able to get there very quickly. But I've already, and Paul and I have been working on this too. Is our stories are all centered around these solar systems that are very close to each other. So, yeah, I guess in a way we've sort of jumped on the bandwagon and already doing that now. But boy, when I heard about that and actually got to see that there's some reality to this, yeah, it was exciting. It was to know that these planets, if you stand on one and look at the other, I think somebody was telling me that one of the planets nearby would actually be larger than our moon. It would be orbiting their sun, going by this other planet at a size larger than the moon. That is just phenomenal. Just breathtaking to be able to see something like that.
Yeah, I got to watch that on the news yesterday, so they actually had some visual imagery to go along with it, and that's exciting. I mean, even my wife called me like, "You're going to want to watch this." So she knows I love that kind of thing. I go out to the NASA website on a regular basis to see what kind of images they're bringing back.
That's awesome. And it's a great time to be a writer. There's you mentioned going to the NASA website. Man, if you can't browse around there and come up with some story ideas, this is a great time.
Have you?
I was going to say,
have you noticed the tendency for writers nowadays to try to take a normal story that maybe like Frankenstein or Bram Stoker's Dracula and all that, and then they turn it into something different and unique? I love the redo. They're not remaking them; they're changing them significantly enough to be a better story, or maybe one that I don't want to say better because I don't want to insult the classics, but it does seem to be a refreshing twist on old stories and just changing it up a little bit. I'm actually enjoying a lot of it.
Yeah, and I heard someone say, talking about songwriters, they said like Paul McCartney and John Lennon wrote 90% of the songs that can ever be written. Everything we do is kind of a twist on a Beatles song. So there are there are kind of a handful of stories. Really that, and we're all just kind of remixing those and putting new clothes on it and things like that. And I'm with you. I don't get, offended by that in the least. I like to see what creative twist people put on things for sure. So you guys have the second book in the series is coming out, this week, when this airs. Tell us a little bit about it. What can we expect from this unfolding story? And was writing the second book easier than the first one?
Our work schedules got in the way a lot, so it was actually a little harder this time. But I think the story is, boy, how do I not give away anything? But the first book ends, I would say, a very epic ending and very unique. But the hero, obviously Magnus, a.k.a. Asher, is now trying to reach his enemy, trying to get to, that final, his goal is to solve who killed his fiancée, find out who did it. And his mentality at the end of the book is that he's going to destroy them all. And so I've taken a character, and Paul's kind of tweaked him and because remember, he's done the aliens more than the humans, but we've created a character you can love but hate, because you understand that he's not the best of people. He doesn't have the heart that some heroes do. He's more about revenge and I guess trying to figure out how he can get forgiveness in his own heart for letting his girlfriend, and he blames himself anyway, for letting his girlfriend die, and he couldn't stop it. So yeah, it's a tough one. But Galactic Satori Book 2, which is we're sub-labeling Kwon, is a story about him getting to that planet, getting to those aliens, being there, and then learning something that he didn't know that changes him completely. So without trying to, don't want to tell you too much, but things aren't what he thought, and he has to change his tactics.
I'm gonna have to work up a graphic for this episode with Kirk yelling "Kwon."
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, yeah, and a lot of things that we've worked on. I think as writers, we've been influenced by our own experiences, our own stories we read and movies we've watched. So yeah, there's some. If you read book 1, you're going to hear some of the music we used to listen to, or references to, some of the shows we were really into. Some of the story ideas we've used to hear about. So it is a throwback to the 80s, late 80s, and there's a lot of different elements from that time period that are introduced to for people who lived through it. They're going to love it, I think, because you're going to get to reference things that you used to use when you were, or used to do when you were young.
I'm excited. I'm about halfway through book 1, and as soon as book 2 releases, I'm gonna plow through it and get into that. That sounds really exciting. Guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. Nick Breaker, Paul Hicks. Where can people connect with you guys? I'm going to put a link in the show notes to where they can pick up Galactic Satori Chronicles Earth, which is book 1, and Kwon, book 2. But do you guys have a website where people can follow you, or what can they do? Yes.
nickbreaker.net, galacticsatori's.net, or was it galacticsatorichronicles.net? I actually never typed that one in yet. But because I always clicked on it as a link. And then paulehicks.net. Yes. But yeah, if you want to get to us there, you can contact us there. You can learn about where we're going to be at some of the conventions coming up. Some of the overall story arcs that we're working on, because we are going to take these four series and create merge them into one. So there's going to be 5 series together that all are linked. I'll let the reader figure that out. So that's to be determined.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on and share some writing knowledge with us. I thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you, Hank. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to Nick and Paul for coming on the show this week. Be sure to click on the link in the show notes to go to Amazon and pick up Galactic Satori Chronicles Book 1, and now Book 2 is available. For March 1st through March 5th, the first book, Galactic Satori Chronicles Earth, is free, so you've got no excuse not to jump into this great series. Now stay tuned for just a minute for a clip from Richard Gleaves' General of the Dead from his Jason Crane series. Also available in the show notes. Click on the link and go pick it up. One of my best picks of 2016. Thanks for listening.
Jason Crane knelt before the grave of his great-great-great-grandmother with onion skin paper in his left hand and a stick of charcoal in his right. The paper rippled in the wind, threatening to twist and tear over the cemetery wall like an escaping ghost. He frowned and pressed it flush against the stone, pinning it at top with his palm and at bottom with his knee. He was a thin boy, bony as a grasshopper kneeling in a field. He wore his auburn hair short on the sides and tangled on top. He pushed it out of his eyes now, smudging his forehead, and went to work. He fanned the charcoal back and forth, bearing down to capture the design above the name, Scales of Justice, proclaiming the judgment of the dead. His grandmother had taught him to read such symbols: the sunflower of adoration, the cedar of consecration, the crown, the cypress, a frog for worldly pleasures, and a butterfly for the freeing of the spirit. He'd seen them all in the past 2 weeks. The headstone to his left bore an image of the raven, guardian of the cemetery. Letters shone through, finally, white against black. Annabel Crane, beloved wife of Absalom, mother of Jesse, born August 15th, 1822, called to God August 1st, 1856. Jason stood, rolled the paper, and tucked it into a cardboard tube, careful not to smear the imprint. He lingered, though, leaning against the battered walnut tree, brushing at his blue jeans, enjoying a brief escape from his grandmother's lecturing and the barking of her small black poodle, named Charlie, though it was female. The tiny cemetery perched on a hill overlooking Bridgeport, Connecticut. Once it must have been a beautiful place to be buried, but Bridgeport had sprawled and suburbs had engulfed the area. Bulldozers had burgled away half the hill, so that the former crest was now a cliff, leaving the cemetery situated precariously near an 8-foot plunge down to Chopsy Hill Drive. Above Jason's head, the walnut tree raised thin arms in sad, leafless benediction. 17 graves huddled in rows, herded by a faithful border fence. The weeds grew lushly, overtaking the headstones. No groundskeeper had visited this place in a long time, but a stained mattress lay in the mud, and someone had gang-tagged the marble of the single vault, someone named Naldi, apparently, who smoked Marlboro Lights and mistook the broken birdbath for an ashtray. Jason wanted to stay, to pull the weeds from Annabelle's grave, but the shadows were lengthening. Eliza didn't like to drive at night, and he didn't want to be among the graves after sunset. Oh no, even if they were family. His imagination slipped its leash. He saw himself clearing the earth, shoveling, finding the coffin, opening it, looking down at the browning skeleton and empty eye sockets of a woman he had never known, but who had made him possible. And what? Thanking her? Weeping for her? No, just meeting her. Hello, Annabelle. Guess who I am? Eliza honked again. Jason pushed his hair out of his eyes and scrambled down the hill. Reaching the bottom, he realized that very little shoveling would be required to reach that coffin. Thanks to the bulldozers, the dead were no longer 6 feet under, but only 2 feet inward. If he were to stand on the road and dig into the soft embankment, his ancestors were right there, within arm's reach, waiting. "That's awful," he said as he climbed into the driver's seat. "A good rain and half the coffins could be exposed." "Won't ever happen," said his grandmother. "A coffin from the 1850s is wood. It's all rotted through now. She'll stay put. The dead always stay put." They drove on. The cemetery on the hill dwindled in his side mirror. She'll stay put. The dead always stay put. The thought did not make him feel better. He suspected it might not be true. A dozen yards farther on, they pulled into a parking lot and ordered sandwiches from a strip mall Subway.
Be sure to tune in every Tuesday and Friday for brand new episodes of the Author Stories podcast. Thanks for listening.